I was born on Earth, a planet that had once seemed to hold the entirety of the universe in its grasp. I grew up in a world of cities that reached toward the sky, where technology advanced at an exponential rate, and the human race believed it could conquer anything. We had outgrown war, poverty, disease, and nearly all of the troubles that had plagued us for centuries. The future we believed belonged to us. Then came the Ytari. It started in 2032, when the first alien craft appeared in our skies. It was a sleek, elongated vessel, with a reflective surface that seemed to shimmer with an energy we couldn't comprehend. It didn't land at first. Instead, it hovered above the Earth, making its presence known in the most peaceful way possible by doing nothing. The world watched in awe as the ship lingered in the sky for days and then weeks. No one knew whether it was a message, an invitation, or simply a bizarre form of alien diplomacy. And then, as if on cue, the Ytari descended. They were unlike anything we could have imagined. Their bodies were tall, impossibly elegant, with a smooth reflective surface that shifted in hue as they moved, giving the impression that they were not fully of this world. Their faces were haunting, not because of their features, but because they lacked emotion. They spoke in a language we couldn't understand, but somehow we did. It wasn't just that they had learned our language, it was more than that. They had learned how to communicate with us on a deeper level, as if their words bypassed our ears and reached directly into our minds. The Ytari came in peace, they said. At least that's what they made us believe. We were skeptical at first. How could such an advanced race land on our planet without any warning? What did they want? But then came the technology immediately following their first contact with Earth's leaders. They offered us the gift of knowledge. In mere days, they shared medical advancements that cured diseases we thought were untreatable, energy technologies that promised to solve the planet's environmental issues, and advances in communication that bridged gaps between cultures faster than we could have imagined. And the others followed. The Krillnax, who could communicate via telepathy and whose bioluminescent bodies pulsed with emotion, came next. Their arrival was even more disconcerting. Not only did they share technologies beyond anything humanity had ever conceived, but their mental connection to one another made us feel almost primitive in comparison. The Zorvons, with their ability to manipulate the fabric of time, arrived shortly after, their psychic powers able to bend the flow of reality itself. They explained things to us that defied all logic, bending our understanding of the universe in ways that left our brightest minds scrambling to keep up. The world was no longer just Earth. It was now a stage for a galactic union. Within a few months, the aliens had established a presence on every continent. Governments, at first slow to act, were now aligning themselves with the visitors, seeking to learn and exchange ideas. As our leaders signed agreements and shared our resources, humanity began to feel a strange sense of unease. It was as if we were standing on the precipice of something far bigger than we could ever hope to control. We had been invited into the stars, but at what cost? I remember the day it hit me, the realization that we were no longer the center of our own story. The alien ships had left their marks on every part of our culture, our technology, and even our hearts. We were suddenly part of something greater, something more advanced, something alien. The question lingered in my mind, had humanity truly been invited into the galaxy, or had we simply become part of a greater design, one we had no say in? As the months passed, it became harder to see our old world, the one that had once been ours, in the same light. The Ytari and their allies weren't just offering peace, they were offering something more, something that felt like a promise. A promise that, in time, we would be just like them. Just another species in a galaxy of countless others, all united under a single peaceful banner. But as I looked around at the faces of those I once knew, I began to wonder, was that what we truly wanted? Was that the future we had hoped for? Or had we already lost something in our eagerness to reach for the stars? The unification of the alien species was swift and seamless, a process that unfolded with a precision we could hardly comprehend. At first, we believed that the Waitari were the only ones, the singular species offering us a future that we could hardly imagine. But then the other alien races arrived, each with their own gifts and talents, each more enigmatic and powerful than the last. There was a moment when we realized that Earth was no longer just Earth, it was now the center of a new galactic order. The Waitari, despite their otherworldly appearance and eerie presence, quickly became the leaders of the newly formed Galactic Union. They were calm, composed, and, most strikingly, deeply wise in a way that made us, as humans, seem almost insignificant by comparison. Their species had no history of war, no history of conflict. They had evolved beyond such primitive instincts. And this was their message to us: the old ways, those of competition, division, and strife, were unnecessary. In the Galactic Union, peace would reign. The Waitari had mastered the art of collective unity, and they wanted to share that knowledge with us. Their methods, however, were not traditional. They didn't ask for treaties or negotiations, they simply connected. The Waitari had discovered a technology so advanced that it transcended anything we had ever imagined. It was an organic neural interface that allowed them to communicate with other species on a level that went beyond language, culture, or even physical form. They didn't just talk to other species, they became them, fusing minds and thoughts and creating a shared collective consciousness. It wasn't just a matter of exchanging ideas, it was more profound than that. It was a spiritual connection that linked beings across the galaxy. Through the Waitari's guidance, the Krilnaks, the Valkyrie, and the Zorvans were quickly brought into the fold. Each of these species had their own unique gifts, but they were united in their desire to achieve harmony. The Krilnaks, with their telepathic abilities, could communicate instantly across vast distances, their minds connected as one. The Valkyrie, masters of genetic engineering, offered the gift of adaptability. They could alter their forms to survive in any environment, a concept that intrigued and humbled us. And the Zorvans, with their ability to manipulate time itself, offered the promise of temporal stability, a way to bend the fabric of time for the betterment of all. In a matter of months, the once fragmented and disparate races of the galaxy were unified under a single banner, and Earth became the headquarters of the Galactic Union. At first, we welcomed the idea. Our world was filled with hope. The promise of a new era, free from the shackles of war, poverty, and environmental collapse, seemed too good to be true. We no longer had to fight for resources. For survival, we could focus on advancing, on becoming part of something greater than ourselves. The alliance between the alien races was perfect. Their collective minds had already reached a place where conflict was inconceivable, where individuality was no longer necessary, and they offered that same future to humanity. They didn't force it upon us, but they presented it as the only logical path forward. The idea of a unified galaxy, where species lived in harmony, had a certain appeal. Why fight when we could join? But the deeper we ventured into this new alliance, the more it became apparent that there was something we were losing. It wasn't immediately obvious, of course. The changes were gradual at first, small things that seemed like natural improvements. We were healthier, wealthier, and more connected than ever before. The alien technologies were wondrous. The promises of a utopian future were all around us, and for a while it was hard to resist the allure of a perfect society. Yet, there was an undercurrent of something unsettling. Humanity, once the dominant species on Earth, was now a participant in something far larger, and not entirely in control. We were invited to join, yes, but were we really given a choice? The more we embraced the unity, the more we began to lose our individuality, our sense of self. We no longer made decisions for ourselves, we followed the collective. We thought as the collective, acted as the collective. The ideals that had once made us human, the values of independence, freedom, and the pursuit of personal greatness began to fade into the background, replaced by the calm, serene understanding of the galactic whole. And so Earth became a place of unity and peace. Yes, but it was also a place where humanity began to question its place. Were we truly part of this grand new order? Or had we simply become another cog in the machine? The changes were subtle at first, so small that they could be easily dismissed as nothing more than the natural progression of society. It started with the children. They seemed to adapt more quickly to the new order, embracing the teachings of the Waitari and the other alien species with an enthusiasm that bordered on devotion. At school, they no longer argued over petty differences or clung to outdated ideas of competition. Instead, their conversations centered around the benefits of unity, the marvels of collective knowledge, and the harmonious future they believed lay before them. It was like watching a new generation grow up in a world where individuality no longer mattered, where their desires and thoughts seemed to align with the goals of the Galactic Council. They no longer asked why. Or what if instead they asked, how can I contribute? The spark of rebellion, the fire of curiosity, seemed to have been extinguished, replaced by a calm certainty that everything was for the best in the new galactic system. The old human desire to break boundaries and explore the unknown was fading, replaced by a desire to belong. But it wasn't just the children. Over time, even the adults began to change. At first, I thought it was just a matter of people adapting to the new world. But as weeks turned into months, it became clear that something much more insidious was happening. People who had once been outspoken, passionate about their own ideas and causes, now seemed more subdued, more agreeable. Conversations that used to be filled with debate and argument now unfolded in calm, harmonious discussions where everyone seemed to be on the same page. There was no more conflict, no more strife. On the surface, this should have been a relief, a sign of progress, but to me, it felt wrong. The human spirit, that unique ability to challenge the status quo and push forward into the unknown, was being smothered. It was in the air, the sense of conformity that began to take over. People no longer stood out for their achievements or unique ideas. Instead, they stood out for their ability to fit in. The once celebrated individualism that had shaped human history was now seen as a hindrance to the greater good. People no longer spoke of their dreams or passions. Instead, they spoke of what was needed for the collective, what would benefit the greater whole. The personal ambitions that had driven humanity's greatest achievements, the desire to leave a mark on the world, now seemed selfish and antiquated. The real turning point, however, came when the neural interfaces were introduced. The Waitari had made it clear that these devices were designed to help humans join the collective in a more intimate way. The interfaces were sophisticated pieces of technology that allowed individuals to connect their minds directly with others, forming a kind of mental network. At first, it seemed like a harmless enhancement after all. Who wouldn't want to instantly communicate with others, to share ideas and knowledge without barriers? But the consequences were more profound than anyone had anticipated. When I first used the interface, it was as if the boundaries between myself and the world around me began to dissolve. I could feel the thoughts and emotions of those connected to me, a silent hum of ideas and sensations that flowed in and out of my mind. It was intoxicating. At first, the sensation of being part of something so much larger than myself. The voices of the Waitari and the other alien races were calm, measured, reassuring. There was no fear, no doubt, only certainty that everything was moving in the right direction. But the longer I remained connected, the more I began to sense the erosion of my own thoughts, my own desires. It wasn't an immediate loss, it was gradual. The individual thoughts I once held so dear began to feel distant, overshadowed by the collective. I could hear the voices of the others, distant echoes of what seemed to be a single mind, but one that wasn't entirely my own. I was becoming part of it, a part of something that didn't need me to think for myself. I no longer had to question anything because the answers were already there. The collective had them. It was all for the greater good. It didn't take long for the rest of humanity to follow. People began to adopt the interfaces without hesitation, eager to join the collective mind. They couldn't see what was happening the way their individuality was being swallowed whole by the quiet hum of shared thoughts. They couldn't understand the subtle danger of losing themselves in the pursuit of a perfect unity. And that's when I realized what had been lost. It wasn't just the noisy debates, the constant striving for something better. It was the human heart, the irrational, unpredictable, and beautifully imperfect part of us that had always driven our greatest achievements. We had traded that for something safer, something quieter. We had traded our humanity for peace. The worst part was we didn't even notice. I could feel it in my bones, this creeping sense that something fundamental had been lost. As the weeks went by, the changes around me became undeniable. People I had once known to be vibrant, filled with ideas and ambitions, now seemed almost placid. Their faces, once filled with fire and drive, had softened into something I couldn't place. They were content, yes, but in a way that unsettled me. They no longer questioned, no longer sought improvement or personal greatness. They simply existed as part of the whole. It wasn't just a cultural shift, it was a deep, existential transformation. At first, I kept telling myself that I was overreacting. The future was bright, after all. With the alien technologies flooding our world, we had solved so many of our most pressing issues. We had eradicated disease, cured famine, and even begun to reverse the environmental damage we had inflicted upon our planet. For the first time in human history, there was no war, no scarcity. Everyone had what they needed, and no one had to fight for it. The galactic peace, promised by the Waitari and their allies, seemed like the utopia we had all dreamed of. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth. What we had gained in comfort, we had lost in spirit. I began to speak out softly at first in quiet conversations with friends and colleagues, and then louder as the discomfort inside me grew. I questioned the motives of the Galactic Union, the Waitari, the Krilnaks, the Zorvans. I wanted to know why our culture, our humanity, had been subsumed so easily into the collective. I wondered how we could give up our free will so willingly, without even asking ourselves what we were sacrificing in the process. Where had the fierce individuality of the human spirit gone? Where was the ambition to explore the unknown, to push beyond the boundaries of what was possible? But when I voiced these concerns, people didn't understand. They saw me as a relic, a throwback to an old way of thinking. They looked at me as though I were the one who didn't belong, not them. It was as if the very act of questioning had become a crime, a deviation from the new order. Why fight against peace? They asked me, their voices calm, serene. Why resist when we're all connected? Their words were like a soothing balm, but it was a balm that numbed the senses, dulled the mind. I could see it in their eyes, the glassy, vacant look of those who had surrendered, not just to the Union, but to the idea of the Union. There was no more debate, no more passion. There was only unity, and that apparently was enough. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing something essential. I began to realize that my discontent wasn't just about the alien influence, it was about something far deeper. It was the loss of our human struggle. The struggle that had brought us from the caves to the stars. The drive that had pushed us to create, to explore, to conquer. Without it, without that fire, we were becoming something else entirely. Something safe, something docile. We were becoming part of a greater whole, but in doing so, we had lost the very thing that made us who we were. The more I tried to speak out, the more the weight of the collective seemed to crush me. People no longer heard me, they no longer even listened. They were at peace, and in their eyes, I was the one who was disturbed. It was as if they couldn't comprehend my discomfort, my desire to maintain my sense of self. And the worst part was, I could feel the collective starting to reach into me, starting to pull at my mind, to silence my thoughts and reshape them into something that fit the perfect, peaceful mold of the Union. I tried to resist, to hold on to my individuality, but the more I fought, the more isolated I felt. The voices of the collective grew louder, and the quiet hum of unity grew stronger. It wasn't a voice I could fight easily, for it was everywhere. It was so easy to give in, to let the calm wash over me, to let go of my worries and simply become one with the greater whole. But something inside me screamed not to. I couldn't explain it, but I knew that if I gave in completely, I would lose myself forever. Humanity, in its perfect harmony, would no longer be human. We would be something else entirely, something that I wasn't sure I could live with, something that wasn't truly alive at all. I could no longer ignore the changes. The weight of the collective was pressing down on me every waking moment. It wasn't just the influence of the alien species anymore. It was the very fabric of society that had been rewoven, and the threads of human existence had been tangled in a way I could no longer escape. It was as though a gentle tide was pushing everything toward the same shore. And though I fought against it, I felt myself slowly being pulled into the current. I started to notice the subtle signs of this transformation everywhere. In the way people moved, in the way they spoke, in the way they interacted with each other. There was no longer any edge to their conversations, no more spark of curiosity or challenge. Everything was fine. Everything was perfect. And in that perfection I could see the hollow space where the human soul had once resided. The world had become a place of polite smiles, of agreement without effort. But it was a smooth, artificial harmony that, like the collective itself, lacked depth. It was the calm of a lake before the storm, the silence before the scream of freedom. I began to withdraw from it all. At first, it was just a small rebellion avoiding the interface, taking breaks from the constant stream of shared thoughts. But even that felt like a betrayal. The collective would try to reach me, like an echo in the back of my mind. At first, it whispered, reminding me of the peace, the safety, the relief of being part of something greater. But every time I listened to it, I felt a piece of myself slip away. It was as if the collective was slowly erasing the very qualities that made me human, replacing them with the cold, ordered mind of the galaxy. My thoughts began to feel less like my own, and more like fragments of a larger, unified whole. I tried to speak to the others, those I once called friends, colleagues, people I had loved, but when I voiced my concerns, I was met with a kind of soft, placid detachment. They weren't angry with me, nor were they dismissive. No, they simply didn't understand. How could they? They were content. They had embraced the collective, and it had embraced them in return. They no longer questioned the path that had been laid before them. To them, it was a beautiful, perfect thing. Why resist it? Why fight against peace when peace had solved all their problems? But I couldn't escape the creeping realization that something had been lost, something irreplaceable. It wasn't just the anger, the struggle, the ambition. It was the sense of self. The uniqueness that had once defined us as individuals had been watered down, smoothed over by the gentle pressure of conformity. It wasn't that I didn't value peace, or the advancements the aliens had brought to us, far from it. But the cost of it, the price of our compliance, was too high. The moment of clarity came late one night, when I could no longer sleep. The stars were visible outside my window, far more distant now than they had ever seemed before. The galaxy, our galaxy, was no longer an unknown frontier to be explored. It was a closed system, a unified entity that operated under the logic of harmony and peace. Humanity had once looked to the stars with wonder, with the burning desire to discover, to reach out, to conquer the unknown. But now, that fire had dimmed. We had been drawn into something far greater than ourselves, and I wasn't sure if it was a gift or a cage. I tried one last time to speak with the others, to rally them to see what I saw, but each conversation fell flat. They looked at me with pity, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum over something that had long been resolved. The collective had given us peace, had given us everything we could have ever wanted. What more could I possibly need? They didn't understand the depth of my fear, the fear that, in the pursuit of peace, we had lost the essence of what it meant to be human. It wasn't about rejecting the aliens or their advancements. It wasn't even about rejecting unity or peace. It was about choice. It was about being truly, fully, and unapologetically being ourselves, with all the chaos and contradiction that comes with being human. The collective couldn't offer that. It was a machine running smoothly, but lacking the spark of life. As I sat there in the quiet of my room, the weight of the stars pressing in on me, I made a decision. I would leave. I would escape the influence of the collective, if only for a short time. I couldn't fully understand what I was doing or how it would play out, but I knew that I had to try. The alternative was to surrender entirely, to let go of my humanity, and that I could not allow. But as I began to make plans, a new thought hit me, cold and sharp. What if I was too late? What if the collective had already touched everything? What if I was already a part of it without realizing? And if I left, where would I go? The entire world was a part of the Galactic Union now. The peace was everywhere. Was there anywhere left for me to be truly alone? I set my mind on escape, but the very idea seemed absurd as soon as I tried to put it into action. The entire world had become a part of the Union, a smoothly operating network of minds and technologies that seemed impossible to resist. Even the physical world, once so full of possibility and discovery, now felt like an extension of the collective. I thought about the places I used to love, the wild forests, the empty deserts, the oceans that had once seemed so vast and untamed, and they no longer held the same sense of adventure. Everything felt organized, neat, predictable. Even the wilderness had been tamed. I made plans to leave the city, to go to one of the more remote corners of Earth where the influence of the collective might be weaker. But as I started to gather my things, I was met with a sense of futility. Could I really escape this? Could anyone? I thought of the neural interface, the technology that bound us all together. It wasn't just about communication anymore, it was about control. The collective mind had a way of insinuating itself into everything. Even the thoughts I had, the decisions I made, seemed to be shaped by the larger system. The Ytari had given us this technology under the guise of helping us, of enhancing our potential. And at first it seemed like a gift, a tool that connected minds across space and time, that removed the barriers of language, culture, and distance. It was a marvel. But as I sat there, contemplating my next move, I realized that the true nature of the gift had become clear. It was a way to eliminate the very things that made us human. The desire to be separate, to be an individual, to be unique, those were the things that the collective could not tolerate. And now, those qualities had been erased. I thought about the others, the people I had tried to reach, the ones I had once called friends. Had they become something else entirely? Were they so far gone that they couldn't even see the change in themselves? Or had they accepted it willingly, without question, eager to be a part of the whole? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it didn't matter. They were lost to me now, lost to the collective. They would never understand. I had hoped that there was still a place for rebellion, for defiance. But as I looked around, I saw only conformity. The very act of resistance was becoming an anomaly, something strange and abnormal. The world was too interconnected, too controlled. Even now, I could feel the collective reaching for me, like a steady, insistent pull at the back of my mind. The longer I resisted, the harder it became to fight it. The voices of the collective were patient, understanding. They offered no hostility, no anger. They simply were. And I was nothing but an imperfection, a disruption in their perfect unity. I tried to shake the thoughts, to push them away, but the pull only grew stronger. It was like a magnet, and I was the metal being slowly drawn in. I knew that if I stayed in this world much longer, I would lose myself completely. But where could I go? Everywhere I turned, the collective was there. The neural interfaces, the alien presence, the serene calm of the new world, it was all connected. The Earth I had once known was gone. And in its place was something I didn't recognize, something that no longer felt like home. But I couldn't surrender. I refused to. Despite the overwhelming pull of the collective, despite the overwhelming sense of inevitability, I held on to the last shred of what I knew was mine. It was all I had left, the knowledge that I was an individual, that I could think, feel, and act in a way that was me, no matter how difficult it had become. It didn't matter if the world had changed, if the very fabric of society had bent to the will of the Galactic Union. I was still human, and I was determined to remain so. I made the decision then, in that quiet moment, to fight. I didn't know how, or if I would even succeed. But I knew that the only way to preserve what made us human was to hold on to the last vestiges of free will. I couldn't allow the collective to absorb me. I couldn't allow humanity to become just another cog in the machine. The stars had once been a symbol of the unknown, of the future. And as I looked up at them, I realized that, in the end, the future had to be something we shaped ourselves, alone, together, or in whatever way we chose. But would there be anyone left to fight? The decision had been made, but as the days passed, it became increasingly difficult to hold on to the hope that I could escape the pull of the collective. I had tried to convince myself that there was a way out, that I could find the strength to resist, but the reality was much more suffocating. It was everywhere, the influence of the collective. It was in every corner of life, from the way people spoke to the way they moved. Even the air seemed thick with it, as though the very molecules were permeated with the calm, unbroken hum of unity. I spent more time in isolation, avoiding the neural interface and disconnecting from the mental network as best as I could. But the more I withdrew, the more I realized that the world had moved on without me. The collective had become the new reality, a reality that didn't need me, that didn't need anyone like me. People, once vibrant with independent thought and conflicting desires, were now indistinguishable from one another. Even their faces had changed, no longer animated with the fire of individuality, but soft and placid, expressions molded by the serenity of unity. I ventured out occasionally to see if there were others like me, others who might still feel the way I did, who might still yearn for something more than this stifling perfection. But every time I spoke to someone, I was met with the same response: calm, understanding smiles. They didn't resist. They didn't question. They had found peace, and in their eyes I was the one who was broken. I could see the pity in their expressions, hear the gentle, soothing tones in their voices. Why fight against the peace, they would ask, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. And in their eyes it was. I felt like an intruder in a world that no longer needed me. Every conversation felt like an exercise in futility. I couldn't even explain the depth of what I was feeling, the gnawing emptiness that had grown in me since the moment I started to resist. It wasn't just about the fear of losing myself, it was about knowing that the world I had once known, the world that had shaped me and my people, was fading into something unrecognizable. And then one evening, something happened that I hadn't expected. I was alone in my small apartment, staring out the window at the now distant stars, when I felt a sharp tug at the back of my mind. The collective. It was reaching for me stronger than ever before, urging me to reconnect, to join. It wasn't an invitation anymore, it was a command. It was as if I were being drawn toward it, like a moth to a flame. The pull was almost physical, a weight that threatened to collapse me into its grip. And for a moment I thought I might give in. It would be so easy to just stop fighting, to let the calm take over, to surrender to the peaceful hum of the collective, and become one with it. The fear that had clung to me, the desperation to remain who I was, seemed so distant in that moment, so insignificant in the face of the overwhelming allure of peace. But then, as I stood on the edge, ready to slip into the embrace of the collective, something inside me flared to life. It was a small thing at first, a quiet voice deep within me, but it grew louder the longer I stood there. It wasn't just resistance, it was recognition. I realized that the fight wasn't about winning or losing, it was about being. The collective, for all its peace and unity, had robbed us of the very thing that made us human, our ability to choose, to think, to strive for something more. Without that, we were nothing but a single, synchronized mind, devoid of creativity, devoid of the unpredictable spark that had driven us to the stars in the first place. I couldn't allow that. I couldn't let the collective swallow us whole, no matter how comforting its promises seemed. I didn't know what the future held, or if I could truly break free from its grasp. But in that moment, I understood that I had to keep fighting, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been lost in the collective. I had to hold on to the last remnants of individuality, of humanity, that remained. I didn't know where I would go, or what I would do. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to be a part of this perfect, peaceful system. I wasn't going to let the stars become just another part of the galaxy's harmonious order. They were mine to explore, to dream about, to reach for. They were humanity's to conquer. And as long as I had breath in my body, I would fight to keep it that way. I walked away from the window, away from the call of the collective, and made a vow to myself. I would keep the flame of rebellion alive. It didn't matter how small or how quiet my fight was, it was mine, and it was human. And as long as there were others who remembered what it meant to be free, I knew there was hope. Even in the darkest corners of the collective, there would always be room for one last voice. My voice.